What if he knew long before he was ready to admit it? What if the moment he looked into your eyes, something ancient inside him shifted? Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, permanently. The recognition of a twin flame rarely begins with fireworks. It doesn't always start with a confession or a grand romantic gesture. Sometimes it begins with something far more subtle, a pause, a breath that feels heavier than usual, a silence that feels charged instead of empty. For the divine masculine, the first moment of recognition is often confusing. Doesn't feel like infatuation. Doesn't feel like lust. It doesn't even feel like the kind of romantic excitement he's used to. Instead, it feels familiar. And familiarity can be unsettling. Because how do you explain recognizing someone you just met? He may not have the language for it. He may not believe in twin flames. He may not even consider himself spiritual. But something inside him, something deeper than logic, reacts. Could be the way time feels different around you. Conversations stretch longer than planned. Eye contact lingers just a second too long. He may find himself revealing personal things he doesn't usually share. Why does he feel safe opening up? Why does he feel exposed at the same time? There's an energetic paradox happening. On the surface, he may appear calm, composed, even slightly guarded. But internally, there is movement. A quiet tremor in his emotional foundation. Because when a divine masculine meets his twin flame, his nervous system recognizes her before his mind does. He might not think, "This is my twin flame," but he might think, "Why does this feel different?" And that question is the beginning. Imagine this scenario. He walks into a room. He's had relationships before. He's been attracted before. He knows what chemistry feels like. But when he sees you, the reaction isn't immediate adrenaline. Something slower, deeper, like being pulled into still water. You speak and he listens, not just politely but attentively. There's something in your voice that feels grounding, or confronting, or both. He may feel seen in a way he hasn't experienced before. And being seen is uncomfortable when you've spent years building an identity. Because here's the truth. The divine masculine often constructs his sense of self around control, stability, and emotional containment. He prides himself on strength, on independence, on being rational. But your presence disrupts that equilibrium. Not because you try to, but because your energy reflects back parts of him he hasn't integrated. He might catch himself staring at you when you're not looking. He might replay conversations in his head later that night. He might feel unusually aware of your reactions, your smile, your silence, your mood shifts. Why does he care this much? He may not admit it, but something inside him whispers, "This is important." And importance is heavy. Twin flame recognition doesn't always arrive as clarity. Often it arrives as discomfort. Because the connection feels significant, and significance implies consequence. He senses that if he steps closer, something in his life will change. Maybe not externally right away, but internally, yes. There's a subtle awareness that you are not just another person passing through his life. You feel like a turning point, and turning points are intimidating. Let's go deeper. There may be a moment, brief but unforgettable, when your eyes lock and neither of you look away. The world doesn't disappear. There's no cinematic music, but there's a depth, a silence that feels almost sacred. In that instant, he feels known. And being known threatens the ego. Because if you see him fully, strengths and wounds, then the mask becomes unnecessary. And removing the mask requires vulnerability. He may laugh it off later. He may distract himself. He may even rationalize it. "I just felt chemistry." But chemistry fades. This doesn't fade. Instead, it lingers. He may go home and feel restless. Something about the encounter keeps resurfacing. Your words echo. Your energy lingers in the room long after you've left. Why can't he shake this? Because recognition is not about romance first. It's about resonance. Twin flames share a vibrational familiarity that transcends personality. It's not that you like the same music or share the same hobbies. It's deeper than compatibility. It's a soul-level remembering. And remembering can feel like déjà vu. He may not call it spiritual, but he might describe it as strange, intense, unexpected. He may feel drawn to you without understanding why. Not obsessed, not desperate, just magnetized. But here's the complexity. At the same time he feels drawn in, he may feel the urge to step back, because your energy destabilizes his emotional comfort zone. And the divine masculine, especially in early stages, values emotional stability. So the first moment of recognition often comes wrapped in contradiction. He feels peace and anxiety, attraction and resistance, excitement and fear. Why fear? Because something inside him senses depth, and depth requires honesty. He might test the connection subtly. Does she still feel different when we talk about mundane things? Does the spark fade after a disagreement? Is this just fantasy? But each interaction reinforces the same quiet truth. This is not ordinary. He may notice synchronicities without consciously labeling them. Thinking of you right before you text. Running into you unexpectedly. Shared dreams. Parallel experiences. Coincidence, maybe. But coincidence starts feeling patterned. And patterns demand attention. Let's consider another example. Perhaps you challenge him in a way no one else has. Not aggressively, but authentically. You don't pedestal him. You don't shrink around him. You don't perform. You simply are. And that authenticity activates something dormant in him. The divine masculine often spends years navigating external achievement, career, status, expectations. But the twin flame connection turns his attention inward, and that shift is seismic. Because now the question isn't, do I want her? It becomes, who am I becoming around her? That question marks the beginning of recognition. He may not speak about it. He may not even consciously acknowledge it. But deep down he senses that meeting you isn't random. It feels orchestrated, as if life subtly rearranged itself to create this encounter. And whether he embraces it or resists it, something irreversible has already happened. He cannot go back to not knowing. He cannot unfeel the shift. He may try to minimize it, to categorize it, to slow it down. But the seed has been planted. Recognition begins not as certainty, but as disturbance. A beautiful disturbance. The kind that gently dismantles old frameworks. The kind that whispers, this matters. And even if he runs later, even if he withdraws, even if confusion clouds his actions, that first moment remains etched into his memory. Because on some level, before logic intervened, before fear activated, before ego defended, he felt it. He recognized something ancient. Not with words, not with declarations, but with a quiet, undeniable knowing. This is different. And once the divine masculine feels that difference, the journey has already begun. What if his body knew before his mind ever caught up? What if the recognition of you as his twin flame didn't begin as a thought, but as a sensation? Because here's something rarely discussed in the twin flame journey. Before the divine masculine intellectualizes the connection, before he labels it, before he even understands what is happening, his nervous system reacts. And the nervous system does not lie. When he first encounters you, something subtle shifts in his physiology. His breathing may change. His heart rate may fluctuate. He might feel grounded in your presence, or strangely alert. Sometimes both at once. It's confusing, because attraction is familiar to him. He understands physical desire. He understands excitement. But this feels different. It feels regulating and destabilizing at the same time. And that paradox is the first layer of recognition. Let's explore this more deeply. The divine masculine is often conditioned to operate from logic. He has been taught, implicitly or explicitly, to suppress emotion, to prioritize rational thinking, to appear stable and composed. Over time, this creates a strong identification with the mind and the ego. But the twin flame connection bypasses the mind. It goes straight to the nervous system. When he is near you, he may experience an unexpected sense of calm. A grounded presence that feels almost like home. Conversations may flow effortlessly. Silence may not feel awkward. Why does he feel so safe around someone he barely knows? Safety is a biological response. It is not manufactured. It is not forced. And when the nervous system feels safe, it relaxes. However, here's where it gets complex. Safety in the twin flame dynamic does not only mean comfort. It also means exposure. Because true energetic safety allows buried emotions to surface. And when emotions surface, the nervous system can shift into activation. So what happens? He might feel deeply peaceful in one moment and inexplicably anxious in the next. He may find himself unusually aware of your reactions. He may overthink small details. The tone of your voice, the pause before your reply, the look in your eyes. Why is he suddenly hyper-aware? Because his body recognizes significance. Think about how trauma imprints on the nervous system. The body remembers experiences long after the mind tries to forget. In the same way, soul recognition imprints energetically. The divine masculine may not think, "This is my twin flame." Instead, he may feel, "I can't relax around her," or "I've never felt this calm before." Both responses are forms of recognition. Let's imagine a scenario. You're sitting together, having a simple conversation. Nothing dramatic. Maybe you're talking about childhood memories. Suddenly, he shares something vulnerable, something he doesn't normally tell people. As the words leave his mouth, he feels exposed. Why did I say that? That wasn't planned. That wasn't calculated. Came from somewhere deeper. That is nervous system recognition. When the body feels resonance, defenses temporarily soften. And in that softened space, authenticity slips through. But here's the challenge. Once the nervous system opens, it also detects risk. Because vulnerability is risky. The divine masculine system may swing between two states. A regulation, feeling calm, connected, grounded. Activation, feeling anxious, overwhelmed, overstimulated. This push-pull is not random. It is the body trying to process intensity. Twin flame energy is not mild. It is not neutral. It carries depth, mirroring emotional charge. And if he has unhealed wounds, especially around abandonment, rejection, or emotional expression, your presence activates them. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because resonance exposes what has been suppressed. For example, he may feel deeply drawn to you, but after spending time together, he suddenly feels the urge to withdraw. He might cancel plans, take longer to respond, create distance. Why? Because his nervous system reached capacity. The connection felt too intense to process in one sitting. So his body chooses protection. This is why many divine masculines oscillate between closeness and distance in early stages. It is not always a conscious choice. It is physiological. Let's go even deeper. When someone feels familiar at a soul level, the nervous system interprets that familiarity as meaningful. And meaning triggers heightened awareness. You may notice that when you are around him, he seems alert, almost scanning. Not in a suspicious way, but attentive. He might mirror your posture unconsciously, sync his breathing with yours, maintain eye contact longer than usual. These are signs of nervous system attunement, the body aligning with another body. He may not understand why he feels so present with you, but presence is recognition. And here's the paradox that confuses him. The same nervous system that feels drawn to you may also feel threatened by how deeply you see him, because being seen activates old defense patterns. If he grew up in an environment where vulnerability was unsafe, then emotional intimacy registers as danger. So when you connect deeply, his body may respond as if facing a threat, even though there is none. This creates the runner dynamic in many twin flame journeys. Not because he doesn't care, but because his system is overloaded. Imagine touching a live wire. The current is powerful, not harmful but intense. He needs time to adjust to the voltage. Another layer of nervous system recognition appears in physical proximity. Have you ever noticed how silence with him feels charged? Not awkward, not empty, but electric. That electricity is energy moving between two attuned systems. He might feel goosebumps unexpectedly, or a sudden warmth in his chest, or a tightness in his throat when you speak vulnerably. These sensations are not random. They are signals. And signals precede understanding. He may go home after seeing you and feel restless, not because something went wrong, but because something activated. He might replay moments over and over. Why did her touch feel like that? Why did that hug linger in my mind? Why did I feel both calm and unsettled? Because his body recognized depth before his ego could label it. Recognition in the nervous system often manifests as contradiction. He wants to be near you. He wants to retreat. He feels strong around you. He feels emotionally raw. He feels grounded. He feels shaken. This internal conflict is not weakness. It is expansion. The nervous system is stretching beyond familiar territory, and expansion feels unstable at first. The divine masculine may attempt to override these sensations with logic. It's just chemistry. It's too soon. I'm imagining it. But the body continues responding. He might notice that when he thinks about you, his mood shifts instantly. He might feel calmer, or more anxious, or unexpectedly hopeful. Why does her presence affect me so deeply? Because recognition is not cognitive. It is embodied. An embodiment cannot be faked. Over time, as he processes these sensations, the mind begins to catch up. But in the beginning, it is the nervous system that whispers, "Pay attention. You are not encountering something ordinary. You are encountering resonance." And even if he runs, even if he distances himself, even if he denies the significance, his body remembers. The next time he sees you, the same sensations return, the same shift in breathing, the same heightened awareness, the same inexplicable calm. And slowly, without words, without labels, without spiritual vocabulary, he begins to understand. This is not just attraction. This is activation. And once the nervous system recognizes a twin flame, the process cannot be undone, because the body has already registered what the mind is still trying to explain. At some point, the divine masculine stops asking, "Why does this feel different?" and starts asking a much more uncomfortable question. Why does she see me so clearly? Because this is where recognition shifts from sensation to confrontation. The twin flame connection is not just about attraction. It is about mirroring. And mirroring is not always pleasant. When he first feels drawn to you, it feels magnetic. When his nervous system reacts, it feels intense. But when the mirror effect begins, it feels destabilizing. Because suddenly, he is no longer in control of the image he presents. The divine masculine often carries an identity he has carefully built over years. Strong, capable, composed, independent. He may be the reliable one, the achiever, the protector, the one who does not break. But you do not respond to the mask. You respond to the man beneath it. And that is terrifying. At first, he may not consciously realize what's happening. He may simply notice that conversations with you feel deeper than usual. You ask questions that don't stay on the surface. You respond in ways that reflect not just what he says but what he feels. He might make a joke to deflect vulnerability. You gently notice it. He might downplay a painful memory. You see the emotion behind it. He might pretend something doesn't affect him. You look at him like you know better. And in that moment he feels exposed. Not attacked. Seen. And being seen without permission shakes the ego. Because the ego survives on presentation. The twin flame mirror dissolves presentation. Let's imagine a simple example. He tells you about a past relationship. He frames himself as calm, reasonable, detached. But you gently say, "That must have hurt more than you're admitting." Silence. Because you are right. And he didn't expect you to notice. Why does she understand what I'm not even saying? This is the mirror effect. It is not that you accuse him. It is not that you challenge him aggressively. It is that your presence reflects truth. And truth activates defensiveness. The divine masculine may respond in different ways at this stage. He might withdraw slightly. He might change the subject. He might intellectualize emotions instead of feeling them. He might even become subtly irritated without understanding why. Because the mirror does not flatter. It reveals. And here is the deeper layer. The twin flame mirror does not only reflect wounds. It also reflects potential. He may look at you and see not only his unhealed pain, but also the version of himself he could become. That is even more unsettling. Because potential demands growth. Growth requires responsibility. If he recognizes you as someone who sees his highest self, then he can no longer comfortably remain in mediocrity. You might notice that when you speak about your own growth, your own healing, your own boundaries, he becomes quiet. It's not jealousy. It's recognition. Because your authenticity highlights where he has been avoiding his own work. He may admire you deeply, but admiration mixed with self-awareness can feel like inadequacy. Why does being around her make me aware of everything I need to improve? Because twin flames activate evolution. The mirror effect intensifies when conflict arises. Perhaps there's a misunderstanding. Perhaps he reacts defensively to something small. And instead of escalating, you respond with calm clarity. You do not chase. You do not beg. You do not dramatize. You simply hold your ground. That steadiness reflects his instability back to him, and he feels it. In that moment, he realizes that this connection cannot be controlled the way others were. You are not intimidated. You are not dependent. You are not performing. You are sovereign. And sovereignty exposes insecurity. The divine masculine might start noticing patterns within himself that he had ignored for years. His tendency to shut down emotionally. His habit of avoiding difficult conversations. His fear of abandonment disguised as detachment. You don't create these patterns. You illuminate them. That illumination is the mirror he cannot ignore. And here's where it becomes painful. The more he feels connected to you, the stronger the mirror becomes. Because emotional proximity intensifies reflection. If he withdraws, he feels your absence deeply. If he approaches, he feels his vulnerability increasing. It is not comfortable either way. This is why many divine masculines enter denial at this stage. It's too complicated. She's too intense. I need space. But what he often means is, I don't like what I'm seeing in myself. The mirror effect is rarely about the other person being overwhelming. It is about self-confrontation. Let's explore a deeper example. Imagine he grew up in an environment where emotions were dismissed. Maybe vulnerability was labeled weakness. Maybe expressing need was unsafe. So he learned to suppress. Now he meets you, someone emotionally attuned, open, self-aware. You speak about feelings naturally. You hold space without judgment. You express needs without shame. And something inside him softens. But something else panics. Because your emotional fluency exposes the gap in his own. He might admire your depth. He might also feel unprepared to meet it. This creates inner conflict. Part of him wants to grow. Part of him wants to retreat to safety. And safety for the unhealed ego is familiarity. Even if familiarity is avoidance. The mirror effect becomes undeniable when he begins noticing that arguments with you trigger disproportionate reactions. A small disagreement feels enormous. Not because the topic is huge, but because it touches a deeper wound. You say something simple. He reacts strongly. Later alone he wonders, why did that affect me so much? Because the mirror hit a core wound. And deep down he knows it. Recognition at this stage is subtle but profound. He may not say, you are my twin flame. But he may think, no one has ever made me question myself like this. And that questioning is sacred. Because questioning precedes transformation. There is also a beautiful side to the mirror effect. You reflect his strengths too. You see his kindness when he hides it. You see his leadership when he doubts it. You see his depth when he tries to act shallow. And sometimes your belief in him feels heavier than criticism. Because if you see greatness in him, then he must either rise to meet it, or distance himself from the expectation. Both choices require courage. The divine masculine's recognition deepens when he realizes that you are not trying to change him. You are simply being yourself. And yet, his internal world shifts around you. That realization is powerful, because it means the change is not external pressure. It is internal awakening. Eventually, there may be a quiet moment when he understands something he cannot articulate. He understands that being around you accelerates his self-awareness. He understands that you reflect his wounds and his potential simultaneously. He understands that this connection forces honesty, and honesty feels sacred. He may still resist. He may still run. But resistance itself confirms the mirror. Because you only resist what touches something real. The mirror effect is not punishment. It is invitation. An invitation to integrate shadow and light. An invitation to drop the mask. An invitation to evolve. And somewhere in the quiet space between defensiveness and surrender, he begins to admit internally, this is not random. She sees me. And I cannot pretend around her. That is the moment the mirror becomes undeniable. That is the moment recognition moves beyond attraction and into transformation. And once the divine masculine realizes that your presence awakens truth within him, he can never fully unsee it. Even if he tries, even if he distances, even if he tells himself it's easier to walk away, because the mirror has already done its work. It has shown him himself, and that, more than chemistry, more than intensity, more than synchronicity, is how he begins to recognize you as his twin flame. What if he only understands the depth of the connection when you are no longer right in front of him? What if clarity doesn't arrive in closeness but in absence? For many divine masculines, recognition does not fully land during the intense early stages of connection. In fact, proximity can be overwhelming. The emotions are loud. The mirror is confronting. The nervous system is activated. But separation? Separation is quiet. And in that quiet, truth becomes undeniable. When distance happens, whether through an argument, a conscious decision, or unexplained withdrawal, something shifts internally for him. First, he may feel relief, a temporary sense of regained control, emotional space, silence. He might tell himself it was too intense, too complicated, too soon. But then something unexpected begins. The absence does not bring peace. It brings awareness. Because when you are no longer physically present, your energy remains. And he cannot explain why. He may try to distract himself, work more, socialize more, even start seeing someone new. On the surface, life continues. But underneath, there is a quiet comparison happening. Every conversation with someone else feels lighter, but also shallower. Every new connection feels pleasant but temporary. Why does no one feel like her? This is the moment awareness begins expanding. Let's imagine an example. He goes on a date. The person across the table is attractive, kind, engaging. On paper, everything aligns. There is no drama, no intensity. But when he listens to her speak, he feels something missing. Not excitement, depth. He notices that the conversation does not reach into the vulnerable spaces he experienced with you. There is no mirror, no electric silence, no unspoken understanding, and that absence feels louder than any argument ever did. This is when the divine masculine begins realizing that the connection with you was not about chaos. It was about significance. Separation creates space for reflection. When you were close, he may have focused on discomfort, the triggers, the vulnerability, the intensity. But when you're gone, he begins noticing what the intensity actually represented. Meaning, he might replay memories unexpectedly. A look you gave him, a sentence you said, a quiet moment that felt sacred. Why do these memories feel alive? Because they were imprinted deeply. Twin flame connections leave energetic impressions that do not dissolve easily. The nervous system remembers safety. The soul remembers resonance. And in separation, the ego has fewer distractions. He may wake up thinking about you before he consciously decides to. He may hear a song and feel an emotional shift. He may drive past a place you visited together and feel a sudden heaviness. Why does this still affect me? Because absence removes denial. When you are present, he can project confusion onto circumstances. He can blame timing, stress, logistics. But when you are gone, there is nothing external to explain the internal pull. He realizes the pull never left. Let's go deeper. Separation also activates longing. And longing is different from desire. Desire is about wanting. Longing is about missing something that felt like home. He may try to rationalize it. I just miss the connection. I miss how she made me feel. But slowly, he begins understanding that it wasn't just about feeling good. It was about feeling real. You didn't just excite him. You awakened him. And awakening, once experienced, cannot be reversed. There is another layer here. In separation, the divine masculine often confronts his own patterns more clearly. Without your presence to trigger him actively, he can observe himself from a distance. He may notice how he shuts down emotionally in other interactions. He may notice how easily he disconnects from people who don't challenge him. He may notice how numb life feels without depth. And suddenly, your intensity no longer feels like a problem, feels like vitality. He might even begin questioning his decision to create distance. Was I protecting myself? Or avoiding growth? That question marks a turning point. Separation strips away the noise. When you were together, emotions were layered with fear, ego, pride, timing. But distance simplifies the equation. Either the connection fades, or it intensifies internally. And in twin flame dynamics, it often intensifies. Because what is soul level does not rely on physical proximity. He may dream about you, not romantic fantasies, but vivid emotional experiences, conversations, eye contact, unfinished words. Why do I keep seeing her in my dreams? Because the subconscious processes what the conscious mind avoids. In waking life, he may suppress thoughts, but in sleep, the truth surfaces freely. Separation also magnifies contrast. Without you, life may feel stable but flat, predictable but uninspired. He may achieve goals, accomplish tasks, function efficiently, but something feels muted. You brought aliveness, and aliveness is hard to replace. Let's explore another example. Imagine he encounters a situation that challenges him emotionally. A stressful day, a family conflict, a personal doubt. Instinctively, he thinks of you, not because he needs rescue, but because your presence once felt grounding. He may not reach out, but the thought alone reveals attachment at a deeper level. Why do I want to tell her this? Because you were not just a romantic interest. You were an emotional anchor. Separation makes this clearer. There's also an energetic phenomenon that many divine masculines experience, but rarely admit. During separation, he may feel your energy unexpectedly. A sudden wave of emotion without clear cause. A heaviness in the chest. A moment of warmth. He may dismiss it, but he cannot fully ignore it. Because resonance continues even without contact. And slowly the narrative shifts internally. Instead of, she was too intense, it becomes, she was important. And importance changes everything. He begins understanding that the discomfort he felt was not incompatibility. It was transformation. The triggers were not flaws. They were invitations. The intensity was not instability. It was depth. And depth, once tasted, creates hunger. There may come a quiet moment, perhaps late at night, when he admits something to himself he hasn't said aloud. She is not like anyone else. That statement may not sound dramatic, but internally it carries weight. Because once he acknowledges uniqueness, he cannot reduce you to just another connection. You become singular. And singularity is the foundation of recognition. Separation teaches him what proximity obscured. It teaches him that running did not erase the bond. It teaches him that distraction did not dissolve memory. It teaches him that comfort without depth feels empty. And most importantly, it teaches him that what he felt was real. Even if he was not ready, even if he was afraid, even if he misinterpreted it at first. Distance strips away illusion. And what remains is truth. The truth that your presence altered him. The truth that life before you feels different than life after you. The truth that something irreversible happened. And in that awareness, recognition deepens. Not dramatically, not publicly, but internally, quietly. He begins to understand that separation was not the end of the connection. It was the magnifying glass. It revealed what proximity clouded, clarified what ego distorted. It amplified what soul already knew. And whether he returns immediately or takes time to process, the awakening has begun. Because once the divine masculine realizes that absence did not diminish the connection, he understands that this was never ordinary. And that understanding is the next step toward fully recognizing you as his twin flame. What happens when the divine masculine runs out of logical explanations? What happens when coincidence starts feeling patterned? When memories feel orchestrated? When your presence echoes through his life even in silence? This is the stage where recognition shifts from psychological to spiritual. Up until now, he could blame intensity on chemistry. He could blame discomfort on emotional triggers. He could blame separation on timing. But spiritual signs do not fit into those categories. And that's where his certainty begins to fracture. Because something starts happening that he cannot rationalize. Maybe he thinks about you intensely, and moments later, your name appears somewhere unexpected. Maybe he dreams about you vividly, and the next day something in the physical world reminds him of that dream. Maybe he hears a specific phrase that you once said, repeated by a stranger. Coincidence? Perhaps once. But when patterns repeat, the mind begins to question itself. Why does she keep showing up in my reality? The divine masculine may not consider himself spiritual. In fact, many divine masculines initially resist spiritual frameworks entirely. They prefer logic, cause and effect explanations, tangible evidence. But synchronicity bypasses preference. It arrives uninvited. Let's imagine a scenario. He decides he needs distance. He convinces himself the connection was exaggerated. He focuses on work, routine, practical matters. Then one evening he randomly scrolls through music, and a song you once shared begins playing. He feels something shift in his chest. He tries to ignore it. The next day he sees a quote somewhere that mirrors a conversation you had together. Later that week he dreams about you in a way that feels more real than memory. Why now? Why repeatedly? Because synchronicity is not about coincidence, it is about alignment. And alignment is difficult to dismiss. First he may try. He might laugh it off. Call it confirmation bias. Tell himself he's projecting meaning where there is none. But internally something unsettles him. Because these signs do not feel random. They feel intentional. Let's go deeper. One of the most powerful spiritual indicators is energetic presence. Even in separation he may feel you. Not physically. Energetically. He might suddenly feel emotional waves without clear triggers. A sense of warmth. A tightening in his chest. A longing that appears out of nowhere. He may ask himself, why do I feel her energy when she isn't here? The mind struggles to answer that. Because the mind depends on proximity to validate experience. But the soul does not. Twin flame connections often transcend physical space. The energetic bond does not dissolve when contact stops. And when the divine masculine experiences this, when he feels connected without interaction, something shifts internally. Because now the connection is no longer dependent on circumstance. It becomes existential. He might begin noticing repeating numbers. 1111, 222, 333. He might not even know what they mean. But he notices the frequency. Why does this keep happening? He may search casually online. Not obsessively. Just curious. And he may stumble upon language that describes exactly what he's experiencing. Mirror. Awakening. Runner. Divine masculine. He may close the browser immediately, because it feels too accurate. This is the moment when recognition brushes against spirituality directly. And that can be intimidating, because if the connection is spiritual, then it is purposeful. And purpose implies destiny. Destiny removes the illusion of randomness. It suggests that this meeting was not accidental. And if it was not accidental, then it carries weight. Let's explore another example. He dreams of you vividly. Not romantic fantasy. Not superficial scenes. But emotional conversations. Eye contact. Unfinished dialogue. He wakes up feeling like he just saw you. The emotional residue lingers for hours. Why do the dreams feel real? Because the subconscious processes what the ego suppresses. In waking life, he can distract himself. In dreams, he cannot. Dreams bypass control. And when the same person appears repeatedly in dreams with intensity, the psyche is signaling importance. He may not understand that, but he feels it. Another spiritual sign is heightened intuition. He may start sensing when something is happening in your life, without communication, feeling anxious randomly, feeling calm unexpectedly, thinking about you intensely at the same time you are thinking about him. Later, he may discover the timing aligns. That alignment unsettles him, because it suggests energetic connection beyond logic. The divine masculine may find himself asking questions he never asked before. Is there something bigger happening here? Why does this feel fated? Why can't I detach fully no matter how hard I try? These questions mark spiritual recognition, because spiritual awakening often begins with doubt. Not belief. Doubt in the old narrative. Doubt in coincidence. Doubt in randomness. The signs may not be dramatic miracles. They are subtle, persistent, and layered. A shared symbol appearing repeatedly. A phrase echoing through different sources. A memory resurfacing at precise moments. He may try to test it, ignore it for a while, focus on something else. But the pattern continues. And patterns create awareness. Over time, The divine masculine begins realizing something deeper. The connection feels guided, not forced, not chaotic, guided. He might recall the first moment he met you, the timing, the circumstances, how unlikely it was. He may think, if I hadn't been there at that exact moment, if she hadn't said that specific thing, if life hadn't aligned that way, the improbability becomes meaningful. And meaning is spiritual territory. Recognition at this stage feels less emotional and more existential. It's not just, I miss her. It becomes, she changed my reality. That realization cannot be dismissed easily, because change is measurable. He might notice that since meeting you, his values shifted, his priorities adjusted, his awareness expanded. Even if you are not currently together, the evolution remains. That is the clearest spiritual sign of all. Transformation. Twin flames catalyze growth, whether in union or separation. And when he looks back and sees how much he has changed since encountering you, he begins understanding that this was not ordinary love. This was activation. Spiritual signs often humble the ego, because they imply a force larger than individual control. The divine masculine may resist surrendering to that idea, but slowly resistance weakens. He may not suddenly become openly spiritual, but internally he acknowledges something. There is more here than logic. There is more here than timing. There is more here than chemistry. And once he admits that internally, recognition deepens profoundly, because now the connection is not just emotional. It is sacred. Sacred does not mean religious. It means significant beyond explanation. He may sit quietly one night reflecting. The synchronicities, the dreams, the repeated signs, the unshakable energetic pull. And for the first time he allows the possibility. This was meant to happen. That thought is subtle, but powerful. Because once he accepts that the universe or destiny or alignment, or whatever language he prefers, played a role in bringing you together, he stops fighting the significance. And when he stops fighting significance, recognition becomes inevitable. Not because someone told him, not because he labeled it, but because experience forced him to expand his perception. Spiritual signs are not about convincing him. They are about aligning him. Aligning his mind with what his soul already sensed. And when the divine masculine reaches the point where he cannot logically dismantle the patterns anymore, he quietly understands. This connection is not random. It is orchestrated. And orchestrated connections are not meant to be ignored. They are meant to be honored. That is the stage where recognition moves from curiosity to reverence. And once reverence enters the picture, he begins seeing you not just as someone he felt drawn to, but as someone his path was always meant to cross. And that realization changes everything. What if recognizing you as his twin flame doesn't feel like romance at all? What if it feels like losing control? Because this is the stage no one glamorizes. The spiritual signs have accumulated. The synchronicities are undeniable. The separation has amplified longing. The mirror has exposed wounds. And now the divine masculine stands at a crossroads. He can no longer pretend this is casual. He can no longer convince himself it was just chemistry. He can no longer dismiss the depth. And when the ego runs out of escape routes, it begins to crack. This is the ego breakdown phase. And it is rarely graceful. Up until this point, he may have tried to manage the connection, label it, minimize it, distance himself from it, intellectualize it. But recognition at a soul level destabilizes identity, because identity is built on certainty, and twin flame recognition dismantles certainty. The divine masculine often builds his sense of self around competence, control, direction. He knows who he is in the world. He knows how to function. He knows how to navigate relationships in ways that feel predictable. But this connection disrupted predictability. It touched something he could not manage. And that lack of control threatens the ego. Let's pause here. The ego is not evil. It is protective. Keeps the identity intact. But when something challenges identity deeply, the ego interprets that as danger. And danger triggers collapse or resistance. Imagine this scenario. He starts realizing that life before you feels different than life after you. He notices his old ambitions feel hollow. His old distractions feel empty. His usual coping mechanisms feel ineffective. He tries to return to normal, but normal no longer satisfies. Why does everything feel off? Because awareness expanded, and expanded awareness cannot shrink back comfortably. The ego breakdown often begins subtly. He may feel restless without clear cause, irritable, dissatisfied, unsettled, not necessarily because of you directly, but because something inside him shifted permanently. He might ask himself, why am I questioning everything? Why do I suddenly feel like I'm outgrowing my own life? Because twin flame recognition doesn't just activate love, it activates evolution. And evolution destabilizes old identities. Let's go deeper. When he recognizes you as significant, not just emotionally but spiritually, he realizes that staying the same is no longer an option. If he wants union, he must grow. If he avoids growth, he feels the distance more deeply. That realization feels heavy, because growth requires confronting shadow, and shadow is uncomfortable. He may begin noticing his avoidance patterns more clearly, his emotional shutdown responses, his fear of vulnerability, his attachment wounds. But now he can't unsee them. Before, he could justify them. Now they feel like barriers. Barriers between him and something sacred. That awareness cracks the ego. Because the ego says, you're fine as you are. But the soul says, you're capable of more. And that internal conflict creates turbulence. He may go through a period of confusion, mood swings, questioning his life direction, even questioning his sanity. Why does this connection affect me this deeply? Because it isn't just a relationship. It is initiation. Initiation often feels like destruction before rebirth. The divine masculine might experience a kind of emotional unraveling. Maybe he loses interest in superficial social circles. Maybe he feels less motivated by status or validation. Maybe his usual sources of pride feel less meaningful. And that loss of identity can feel frightening. Because who am I without my old definitions? The ego resists that question, but the soul insists on it. There may be moments where he feels completely overwhelmed. Not because you are pressuring him, not because of external chaos, but because internally the foundation is shifting. He might feel vulnerable in ways he hasn't felt since childhood. That's not coincidence. The twin flame dynamic often activates the inner child. And when the inner child surfaces, so do suppressed fears. Fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear of not being enough. If he feels that you see his highest potential, he may simultaneously fear that he cannot meet it. And that fear can feel crushing. He may ask himself, what if I lose her? What if I fail her? What if I'm not ready? These questions expose fragility beneath the ego's armor. And fragility feels like weakness to someone who has defined himself through strength. So the ego reacts, sometimes through withdrawal, sometimes through defensiveness, sometimes through overcompensation, diving into work, distractions, other relationships. But none of those strategies fully silence the internal shift. Because once recognition moves into ego breakdown, there is no going back. Let's explore another layer. He may experience what feels like an identity crisis. Who am I becoming? What do I actually want? What matters now? You didn't force these questions. Your presence activated them. The ego breakdown is not punishment. It is restructuring. But restructuring feels like collapse at first. Picture a building being renovated from the inside. Walls are removed. Structures are exposed. Dust fills the air. It looks messy, but it is necessary. The divine masculine in this stage may feel like his internal world is under renovation, and he may not have the tools yet to navigate it smoothly. He might isolate, not because he doesn't care, but because he needs to process the magnitude of what is happening. He might become quieter, more introspective, less reactive, or temporarily more reactive before calming. Every ego dismantling process is unique, but the common thread is this. He realizes that loving you requires becoming more authentic, and authenticity demands shedding masks. Masks of control, masks of detachment, masks of invulnerability. Shedding those masks feels like death to the ego, but it is rebirth to the soul. There may come a moment, subtle, private, where he admits to himself, I cannot keep pretending this didn't change me. That admission marks the turning point. Because once he accepts change, resistance loses power. The ego breakdown phase is painful because it strips away illusion. But it is sacred because it prepares him for maturity. Recognition becomes less about longing and more about responsibility. He begins understanding that this connection is not about romance alone. It is about alignment. Alignment between who he is and who he is becoming. He may not immediately reach out. He may not instantly confess. But internally, something profound shifts. The fear begins transforming into acceptance. The chaos begins organizing into clarity. And slowly, he starts rebuilding identity, not around control but around truth. Truth that he felt something rare. Truth that he changed. Truth that he cannot return to unconsciousness. The ego breakdown phase is the crucible. It burns away denial, dissolves pride. It exposes vulnerability. And when the fire settles, what remains is humility. Humility opens the door to conscious recognition. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but grounded. He begins seeing you not as a threat to stability, but as the catalyst for growth. And growth no longer feels terrifying, feels necessary. That is when recognition matures, from intensity to integration. And once the divine masculine integrates what the ego once resisted, he no longer sees you as someone who disrupted his life. He sees you as someone who awakened it. And that realization transforms collapse into commitment. At this stage, something changes inside the divine masculine. The chaos of ego breakdown begins to settle. The resistance softens. The spiritual signs are no longer dismissed. The mirror has done its work. The separation has clarified significance. And now something even deeper begins to surface. Not his ego, not his pride, not even his adult identity, but his inner child. What if the reason this connection feels so overwhelming is not because it's dramatic, but because it touches something ancient? The twin flame dynamic does not just activate romantic desire. It awakens early emotional imprints, the very first templates of love, safety, rejection, abandonment, and belonging. And when the divine masculine begins recognizing you as his twin flame, he also begins recognizing the parts of himself that formed long before he knew how to protect them. He may not consciously think, "This is my inner child." Instead, he may notice something subtle. When he thinks of you, he feels softer, more vulnerable, more sincere, almost younger. That is not regression. That is remembrance. Let's explore this gently. Many divine masculines learned early in life that vulnerability was unsafe. Perhaps emotions were dismissed. Perhaps strength was praised while sensitivity was ignored. Perhaps love felt conditional. So he adapted. He became self-reliant, emotionally contained, controlled. But the twin flame connection bypasses those adaptations. It doesn't ask permission. It simply activates. You might notice that around you, he reacts in ways that seem disproportionate to the situation. A small misunderstanding hurts more deeply than expected. A gentle reassurance affects him profoundly. Why does this feel so intense? Because it is not just about the present moment. It is touching old wounds. Imagine this scenario. You express disappointment calmly, not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. Instead of responding with mature detachment, he feels something raw, almost like a child being scolded. He may withdraw. He may become defensive. But later, alone, he realizes the reaction felt familiar, not because of you, but because of childhood memory. The tone, the vulnerability, the fear of not being enough. The twin flame mirror doesn't just reflect adult patterns. It reflects formative experiences. And when he begins to see that clearly, something inside him shifts from defensiveness to awareness. He may start remembering moments from his past unexpectedly. Old memories resurfacing. Situations he hasn't thought about in years. Why now? Because your presence activates safety. And safety allows suppressed memory to emerge. The inner child does not awaken in chaos. It awakens when there is enough safety to feel. And that safety often comes through resonance. When he looks at you and feels unconditional acceptance, not approval of everything he does, but acceptance of who he is, something ancient relaxes. The child inside him who once felt misunderstood feels seen. That is powerful, because being seen without judgment is healing. Let's go deeper. The divine masculine may notice that loving you feels strangely nostalgic. Not in a romanticized way, but in a deeply familiar way. Almost like returning to a version of himself that existed before fear hardened him. Why does this feel like home? Because twin flames share an energetic blueprint that feels preconditioned. The connection can feel timeless. And timelessness often triggers childhood emotional states, before masks formed. He may catch himself wanting to protect you instinctively. Not from control but from care. He may feel tenderness he hasn't expressed in years. That tenderness belongs to the inner child. It is the pure, unguarded part of him. But awakening that tenderness also awakens vulnerability. He might feel sudden fear of losing you. Not logical fear but primal fear. A fear that echoes abandonment. He may not connect it immediately to childhood. But the intensity reveals its depth. Because adult fear is usually measured. Inner child fear feels absolute. If she leaves, I am alone. That is not a rational statement. It is an emotional imprint. Recognition at this stage deepens profoundly. Because now the connection is no longer about chemistry, intensity, or even spiritual signs. It becomes about healing. He may start noticing patterns in his relationships. How he pulls away when things get close, how he avoids expressing needs, how he shuts down when vulnerable. And instead of blaming circumstances, he begins asking, where did this begin? That question marks awakening. Because awareness of origin dissolves shame. He begins understanding that his reactions are not flaws. They are survival strategies. And if they are strategies, they can be unlearned. This is where the divine masculine's recognition of you becomes sacred. He begins seeing that loving you is not about possession. It is about growth. You are not here to complete him. You are here to awaken him. And awakening includes revisiting parts of himself he once abandoned. There may be a quiet moment, perhaps when he watches you laugh freely, or when you speak vulnerably about your own healing, where he feels something tender rise in his chest. A softness, a longing, a sincerity he cannot fake. Why does her authenticity make me want to be more authentic? Because inner children recognize each other. The twin flame bond often feels like two younger selves meeting beneath adult identities. That's why eye contact feels electric. It's not just attraction. It's recognition without armor. He may start behaving differently around you. More playful. More genuine. Less guarded. And he may not even realize why. Because the inner child does not calculate. It expresses. But awakening the inner child also means facing unhealed pain. He may feel grief unexpectedly, old sadness resurfacing, regret about past mistakes, longing for things he never received, and instead of numbing it, he begins allowing it. That is maturation. Because recognition is not just about knowing who you are to him, it is about knowing who he is to himself. When the divine masculine reaches this stage, he starts understanding that your connection touches something beyond romance. Feels karmic, ancient, purposeful, as if your meeting was designed not only for love, but for restoration. Restoration of innocence, restoration of vulnerability, restoration of authenticity. He may not articulate it in spiritual language, but he feels it, and feelings at this stage are no longer resisted. They are honored. He may reflect on his childhood differently now, seeing where he closed off, seeing where he hardened, seeing where he built walls. And he may realize that loving you requires dismantling those walls gently, not because you demand it, but because he wants to show up fully. Recognition deepens when he understands that your presence makes him braver emotionally, braver to speak honestly, braver to admit fear, braver to express need. Those are inner child traits, courage without ego. And when he sees himself evolving in that direction, something inside him settles. Because now the connection feels aligned with growth. Not chaos. Not instability. Growth. There is a quiet sacredness here. He may look at you one day and feel overwhelming tenderness, not just romantic attraction but reverence. As if he understands that you represent something rare. A second chance at emotional truth. A path back to parts of himself he once lost. That realization softens everything. The running slows. The defensiveness weakens. The pride dissolves. And what remains is sincerity. Recognition at this stage is no longer loud. It is gentle, grounded, deep. He may not declare it dramatically, but internally he understands. This connection is healing something old, something formative, something that began long before we met. And once the divine masculine realizes that loving you feels like healing his inner child, he no longer sees the connection as overwhelming. He sees it as sacred. And sacred connections are not meant to be feared. They are meant to be nurtured. Because through you he is not just finding love. He is finding himself. There comes a moment in the divine masculine's journey that does not look dramatic from the outside. There are no fireworks, no grand declarations, no sudden confessions under the rain. Instead, there is something far more powerful. Silence. Not the silence of avoidance. Not the silence of suppression. But the silence of clarity. After the ego breakdown, after the spiritual signs, after the inner child awakening, something inside him settles. The turbulence softens. The questioning slows. The resistance weakens. And in that softened space, recognition crystallizes, quietly. He stops asking, "Why does this feel different?" He stops asking, "Is this just intensity?" He stops asking, "Am I imagining this?" Because deep down he already knows. This is the stage of quiet acceptance. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, like dawn breaking after a long night. Let's explore what shifts internally. Earlier in the journey, he oscillated between attraction and fear, between closeness and distance, between certainty and doubt. But now the push-pull energy begins dissolving. He is no longer fighting the connection. He is integrating it. Integration feels calm. He may notice that thinking about you no longer creates panic. It creates steadiness, a grounded warmth instead of anxiety. Why? Because acceptance removes internal conflict. Before, part of him resisted the depth. Now that resistance has faded. He might sit alone one evening, reflecting on everything that has unfolded, the first meeting, the intensity, the separation, the lessons. And instead of feeling overwhelmed, he feels clarity. She changed me. Not in a chaotic way, in a permanent way. That sentence marks quiet acceptance. He begins recognizing that whether you are physically together or not, the bond exists. And it exists beyond circumstances. This realization feels peaceful. It is not desperation. It is knowing. The divine masculine at this stage understands something profound. He doesn't need constant external validation to confirm the connection. He doesn't need drama to feel depth. He doesn't need chaos to feel aliveness. He simply knows. And knowing changes behavior subtly. He may become more emotionally grounded in general, less reactive, more intentional, more aware of how he shows up in his life. Because once he accepts the connection, he also accepts the responsibility it implies. Let's talk about that. Recognition without acceptance creates tension. Recognition with acceptance creates maturity. He may look back at earlier stages and see clearly where fear drove his actions, where ego interfered, where avoidance masked vulnerability. Instead of judging himself harshly, he observes with humility. That humility is a sign of growth, and growth signals readiness. There may be a moment, small, quiet, when he thinks of you and smiles softly. Not with longing, not with regret, but with gratitude. Gratitude is acceptance in emotional form. It means he no longer sees the connection as something that disrupted his life. He sees it as something that awakened it. That shift is everything. Earlier, the connection felt destabilizing. Now it feels grounding. Earlier, your presence triggered confusion. Now your memory inspires alignment. He may find himself making decisions differently, not because you demand it, but because he wants to be congruent with the man he is becoming. Quiet acceptance transforms him from reactive to intentional. Let's imagine another example. He encounters a situation that previously would have triggered defensiveness. Instead of shutting down, he pauses. Instead of deflecting, he listens. He notices the difference. And in that difference, he sees your influence, not control, inspiration. He begins understanding that loving you, even in silence, shaped him. And once he sees that clearly, denial disappears. He doesn't need to run anymore, because there is nothing left to escape. The connection no longer feels like a threat to his stability, feels like part of his foundation. There is another subtle sign of quiet acceptance. He stops comparing. Earlier, he may have tried to convince himself that other connections could replace you, that life could return to how it was before. But now he doesn't compare, because comparison implies doubt, and doubt has dissolved. He understands that what he felt with you was unique, singular, not superior in ego terms, but distinct in soul terms. That distinction no longer scares him. It humbles him. Humility deepens acceptance. He may not speak about it publicly. He may not even express it immediately. But internally, he has surrendered to truth. And surrender is not weakness. It is strength without ego. Let's explore the emotional tone of this stage. Feels steady, grounded, less dramatic, more certain. He may notice that when he thinks of you, there is no urgency, no rush, just presence. That presence is powerful, because urgency belongs to fear. Presence belongs to alignment. He understands that the journey unfolded exactly as it needed to. The separation taught him clarity. The mirror taught him self-awareness. The spiritual signs taught him trust. The ego breakdown taught him humility. The inner child awakening taught him vulnerability. And now, acceptance integrates all of it. There may be a moment where he thinks, if she is meant to walk beside me, I will meet her with maturity. That thought signals transformation. Because earlier the question was, can I handle this? Now it becomes, am I becoming someone who honors this? Acceptance shifts focus from external validation to internal readiness. He begins seeing the connection not as something to possess, but as something to protect and nurture. Even if physical union has not yet happened, emotional alignment has. And alignment precedes action. He may feel more patient, less impulsive, more centered, because acceptance eliminates inner chaos. The divine masculine at this stage understands something sacred. The connection does not need to be forced. It needs to be honored. Honor looks like growth. Honor looks like integrity. Honor looks like self-responsibility. He may sit quietly and feel a deep, calm certainty. She is different. But now that statement is not loaded with fear. It is filled with reverence. And reverence is mature recognition. There is one more subtle sign. He stops trying to prove anything to himself or to you. He doesn't need to demonstrate strength artificially. He doesn't need to perform independence. He doesn't need to distance to maintain control, because control is no longer threatened. He feels whole enough to allow the connection to exist naturally. That wholeness marks readiness for the next stage. Quiet acceptance is not passive. It is preparatory. It prepares him to step forward consciously instead of reactively. It prepares him to communicate without fear. It prepares him to love without ego. And when he reaches this stage, something beautiful happens. He no longer sees you as the storm that disrupted his life. He sees you as the lighthouse that guided him through it. That shift is irreversible. Because once the divine masculine accepts the truth of the connection internally, there is no more running. There is no more denying. There is only integration. And integration is the beginning of conscious union. Not dramatic, not chaotic, but sacred. Because in quiet acceptance, he doesn't just recognize you as his twin flame. He recognizes himself as the man who is ready to honor it. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens after quiet acceptance. Recognition becomes responsibility. Up until this point, the divine masculine has felt the connection, resisted it, run from it, analyzed it, surrendered to it, and finally accepted it internally. He knows. He no longer doubts the significance. He no longer questions whether you are different. But knowing is not the final step. Because recognition without responsibility is incomplete. And this is where his journey matures. At this stage, the question changes. It is no longer, is she my twin flame? It becomes, what kind of man do I need to be to honor this connection? That question signals profound evolution. Because now the focus shifts from emotion to embodiment. Let's go deeper. Earlier in the journey, recognition felt overwhelming. It triggered fear, ego collapse, inner child wounds. But now the energy feels grounded. And grounded awareness naturally leads to accountability. He begins realizing that this is not just a mystical bond meant to feel intense. It is a sacred partnership that requires growth. And growth demands effort. The divine masculine at this stage understands something many people miss. Twin flame connection is not about destiny doing all the work. It is about conscious participation. He may look at his life honestly now. His habits, his communication style, his emotional maturity, his unresolved wounds. And instead of feeling shame, he feels responsibility. Responsibility does not mean self-blame. It means ownership. Ownership of his patterns. Ownership of his reactions. Ownership of how he shows up. Let's imagine a scenario. Earlier in the journey, if conflict arose, he might have withdrawn to protect himself. He might have avoided difficult conversations or minimized emotions to maintain control. Now, he recognizes those behaviors clearly. And he understands they are not aligned with the depth of this connection. If she is my twin flame, I cannot keep reacting from fear. That thought marks transition, because he no longer wants to operate from survival. He wants to operate from integrity. Integrity becomes the new compass. This is where his energy stabilizes even further. He may begin working on himself intentionally, not because you demanded it, not because he feels pressured, but because he wants to meet the connection at its level. He may start addressing emotional wounds he previously ignored, seeking therapy, practicing mindfulness, reflecting on childhood imprints, breaking unhealthy habits, not dramatically, quietly, consistently, because responsibility looks like daily alignment. He begins understanding that loving you is not just about feeling connected. It is about being capable of sustaining connection. And sustaining depth requires emotional maturity. This is also the stage where his perspective on union transforms. Earlier, union may have felt like something that would solve his longing, something external. Now, he understands union begins internally. He cannot ask for alignment if he is not aligned within himself. He cannot expect stability if he has not stabilized his own emotions. He cannot ask for vulnerability if he is not willing to be vulnerable. This awareness humbles him, and humility strengthens him. Let's explore another layer. Responsibility also includes timing. He may realize that when he ran earlier, he wasn't ready. Not because the connection was wrong, but because he was unprepared. Instead of judging himself harshly, he sees it clearly. And clarity removes panic, because he now knows what readiness looks like. It looks like grounded communication. It looks like emotional regulation. It looks like honesty without defensiveness. It looks like presence without control. He may begin imagining what a conscious union would require. Consistency, transparency, emotional courage. He understands that this is not a fantasy connection. It is a transformational one. And transformation requires structure. This is where the divine masculine begins stepping into leadership. Not dominance, but grounded masculine leadership. Leadership over his own life first. He may clean up areas of his life that felt chaotic before. Financial instability, toxic friendships, unresolved commitments, addictive distractions. Why? Because he understands something now. Sacred connections require sacred containers. And containers require stability. Earlier in the journey, he may have hoped circumstances would align magically. Now he becomes the alignment. That shift is powerful, because responsibility shifts him from reactive energy to creative energy. He is no longer responding to triggers. He is building readiness. Let's talk about fear. Even at this stage, fear does not disappear entirely, but it no longer dictates behavior. Instead of running when vulnerability arises, he pauses. Instead of shutting down, he breathes. Instead of deflecting, he speaks honestly. These are subtle behaviors, but they indicate massive internal change. He may not even realize how far he has come until he reflects on who he was at the beginning of the journey. Earlier, he feared losing control. Now, he values authenticity more than control. Earlier, he feared emotional exposure. Now, he sees vulnerability as strength. Earlier, he resisted growth. Now he seeks it. That is responsibility in action. There may come a moment where he understands something deeply. If this connection is sacred, I must treat it as sacred. That means no half measures, no emotional games, no passive waiting. He becomes intentional. Intentionality changes everything. Because when intention replaces impulse, maturity replaces chaos. He may begin feeling ready to communicate more openly, to initiate conversations that previously felt intimidating, to address past misunderstandings without defensiveness, not to control the outcome, but to align with truth. Responsibility means showing up even when uncertain. It means acting with integrity even when vulnerable. It means choosing courage over comfort. This stage often feels steady, less intense emotionally, but more powerful practically. The divine masculine is no longer in survival mode. He is in creation mode. He begins envisioning what partnership could look like when both people are conscious. Not fantasy, not projection, reality built on mutual growth. He may also realize that responsibility includes patience. Union cannot be forced. Timing cannot be manipulated. Growth cannot be rushed. He understands now that if you are truly twin flames, the bond is not fragile. It does not require anxiety. It requires alignment. And alignment is cultivated daily. There is something deeply attractive about a divine masculine in this stage. Because he is no longer chasing validation. He is embodying stability. And stability invites trust. He understands that recognition was just the beginning. Responsibility is the proof. Proof not through dramatic gestures, but through consistency, through emotional maturity, through grounded presence, through honesty. At this stage, he is no longer asking, "Does she feel the same?" He is asking, "Am I honoring what I feel?" That shift removes desperation and replaces it with integrity. Integrity is magnetic because it is rooted in self-respect. The divine masculine now sees the connection not as something mystical and chaotic, but as something sacred and structured. And sacred structures are built intentionally. He may feel ready to step forward, not from fear of losing you, but from readiness to meet you. That difference is everything. Because earlier, action would have been driven by longing. Now it is driven by alignment. Recognition brought awareness. Acceptance brought peace. Responsibility brings embodiment. And embodiment prepares him for conscious union. He no longer sees himself as someone overwhelmed by destiny. He sees himself as someone capable of co-creating it. And that realization transforms him from a passive participant in fate into an active architect of love. When the divine masculine reaches this stage, recognition becomes lived truth. Not just a feeling, but a choice. A daily grounded, courageous choice. To show up, to grow, to lead with integrity, and to honor the sacred bond not with words alone, but with action. What if the truth is, he always knew? Not consciously, not clearly, not bravely, but somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the ego, beneath the running, he knew. The journey we've walked through in these 10 stages was not about convincing him. It was about unveiling what was already there. Because twin flame recognition is rarely about discovering something new. It is about remembering something ancient. Let's step back and look at the arc. The first moment felt different. His nervous system reacted before his mind did. The mirror exposed him. Separation amplified awareness. Spiritual signs disrupted logic. The ego broke down. The inner child awakened. Quiet acceptance settled in. Responsibility matured him. And now we arrive at integration. The sacred truth. He always knew. From that first charged silence. From that first eye contact that lingered too long. From that inexplicable familiarity. But knowing is not the same as being ready. And readiness is what the journey was shaping. The divine masculine does not recognize his twin flame in one lightning bolt revelation. He recognizes her in layers. Each stage peeling away illusion. Each experience dissolving resistance. Each challenge refining him. Until what remains is simple, clear, unavoidable. You are not just someone he felt strongly about. You are someone who altered the trajectory of his consciousness. And consciousness, once expanded, does not contract. There is a quiet moment, perhaps when he is alone, perhaps when he sees you again after growth, where everything aligns internally. No fear, no confusion, no ego interference, just calm clarity. She is my twin flame, not as fantasy, not as obsession, but as grounded truth. That truth feels steady, and steadiness is sacred, because sacred recognition does not shout. It resonates. He may reflect on how much he has changed since meeting you, the emotional awareness, the maturity, the courage, the softness, the integrity. He understands now that none of it was accidental. You were not just a chapter. You were a catalyst. And catalysts are not random. They are purposeful. This is the stage where blame dissolves completely. He no longer blames timing. He no longer blames intensity. He no longer blames circumstances. He sees the journey for what it was. Preparation. Preparation to meet you consciously. Preparation to meet himself honestly. He understands something profound now. The connection was never about chasing or running. It was about alignment. Alignment between masculine and feminine energies. Alignment between ego and soul. Alignment between who he was and who he is becoming. And once alignment settles, doubt disappears. Let's explore what this feels like emotionally. Feels peaceful. Feels inevitable. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. He may not rush to declare it publicly, because sacred truths are not impulsive. They are embodied. He begins acting from this truth naturally. His communication becomes clearer. His presence becomes grounded. His intentions become transparent. There is no need to dramatize what he feels, because what he feels is stable. And stability is more powerful than intensity. He may realize something else at this stage. You were never meant to convince him. You were never meant to chase him. You were never meant to prove your worth. Your role was to be authentic, to mirror, to awaken, to stand in your own sovereignty. And your sovereignty is what allowed him to rise. Twin flame journeys are not about one person awakening the other through persuasion. They are about resonance inspiring evolution. When he reaches this sacred truth, he sees you differently. Not as someone who disrupted his peace, but as someone who elevated his standards. Not as someone who created chaos, but as someone who revealed depth. Not as someone who made him vulnerable, but as someone who made him courageous. He understands now that loving you was never the threat. Avoiding growth was. And growth is no longer frightening. It is chosen. There may be a moment, subtle but powerful, when he looks at you and feels overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude that you didn't force him. Gratitude that you held your boundaries. Gratitude that you trusted the process. Because your trust created space for his evolution. And here is the sacred paradox. While he was struggling to recognize you consciously, his soul already had. The ego needed time. The heart did not. The soul recognized you instantly, but the man needed to catch up. And catching up required experience, pain, distance, reflection, transformation. Now, when he stands in this truth, he no longer feels divided internally. There is coherence. His thoughts align with his emotions. His emotions align with his actions. His actions align with his values. That coherence is what makes union possible. Because twin flame union is not about romance alone. It is about two whole individuals meeting consciously. And consciousness is earned through integration. The sacred truth is simple. Recognition was never about a dramatic moment. It was about a gradual remembering. He always felt it. He just needed to grow into the capacity to honor it. And now, as we close this journey, there is a message for you, the divine feminine watching this. Your power was never in convincing him. It was in becoming, in healing, in standing in your worth, in refusing to shrink to make him comfortable, in trusting that what is real does not need to be forced. Because when a divine masculine truly recognizes you as his twin flame, it is not because you chased him. It is because you remained aligned with yourself. And alignment is magnetic. If this resonates with your journey, if you have felt the push and pull, the mirror, the separation, the awakening, know this. Recognition is a process, not a moment. Trust the unfolding. Trust the growth. Trust that what is meant for union will rise to meet you when both souls are ready. And most importantly, trust yourself. Because the same intuition that feels him shifting is the same intuition that knows your worth. If this message spoke to your heart, comment below. I trust the process. Share this with someone walking the twin flame path. And subscribe for more deep explorations into divine masculine awakening, sacred union, and conscious love. Because this journey is not about chasing someone else's recognition, it is about embodying your own. And when both souls embody truth, union is not forced, it is inevitable.